no distinction between a freelancer like Lineker and a freelancer like you, both presenting shows for the BBC, him with perhaps more success, which is why he gets more money and fame, which is not his fault. And as a result, you think there's a distinction because it saves you from having to be exposed to the same argument and therefore get censored and maybe fired, which seems very convenient. So, you know what, Tessa?
You're just using your wife.
Yeah, look, I mean, we've talked about this a lot.
I feel like Prince Harry here, like the white plonker. Do you know what you're about to throw at me?
Don't say that. That's what we love.
Bear in mind that when I left Good Morning Britain, I think I've talked about this before, but when I left Good Morning Britain, it's because specifically I didn't believe Meghan Markle's claims that she'd gone to someone at the palace and said she was suicidal, and they said she couldn't get any treatment or therapy or help. And also I didn't believe the racism claims. Now, what's interesting is neither of those... No, but hang on, Tessa, here's my point. Neither of those claims get repeated in Harry's 420-page book. Yeah. It's like they never happened. And yet they were the incredibly incendiary and explosive allegations which triggered this whole thing. Now, what happened to them? Where did they go?
It's a question of nuance. I am very clearly a white woman, but I am married to a foreigner at the bottom of the European pecking order, a Romanian. And I remember, and my wider family deny this, I remember my aunt, her little pink fist, banging on the table, our country is too full, we don't want him over here. I remember the way they spoke to him, such as some members, not all members of my family, with a louder voice, like he was a tradesperson coming in the back door in the 1950s. This stuff, it filters in. It's very hard to prove. It's hard to articulate. And we're talking about white on white in the context of my family. So what I'm trying to explain...
You're describing as xenophobia, though.
Right, OK, I know. I've explained that. But I'm talking about these things that are very hard to articulate. They're hard to prove. And they're actually... what happens is they get labelled, they get pigeonholed, they get pushed into two camps.
Hang on.
Actually, I believe Harry when he said he felt something. I've hung around public schoolboys. Yeah. I've been in a group
that's fine.
who have referred to the Serena and Venus Williams as silverbacks. I've heard that with my own ears in the last 10 years.
We're not talking about any of those things. Listen, here's my point.
But we are actually, aren't we?
Well, no, that's what I'm talking about. They went on global television to Oprah Winfrey, the most famous people in the world, and they made direct allegations of racism that they now have said they simply didn't make. We didn't mean to say anyone was racist. They've never named anybody who they originally said these things. Nothing. It doesn't appear in the book. It's just vanished after 2 years of incredible damage to the brand of the monarchy.
And can I just say the agenda's changed? I just want to just throw that point in. I've said this several times. Their agenda has changed, Piers, and so therefore their tactics have too. And so that is why it's no longer in the book. Because their premise right now is about getting their family back.
Should they have the gall to turn up at the coronation? Bear in mind these two have done so much to damage the institution of the monarchy in the last 3 years. Why would they even want to be there celebrating the coronation of our next king?
Well, firstly, I think it is more than possible to highlight racism within an institution whilst simultaneously wanting to reconnect with your family. That's the first point. Secondly...
But is that what they did? Did they highlight racism? Or did he...
Well, hold on a second.
That he didn't know what he was talking
about. That was the original plan, to highlight racism. We already know that they have backpedalled with that.
Yeah, so there was no racism.
We already know that. And in terms of the coronation, well... It's Archie's birthday, as we already know. So, for me personally, I don't believe
4-year-old kid's birthday party versus the coronation of a king.
I don't believe that's a coincidence. I don't believe that that's a coincidence.
Oh, do me a favour.
I do not. Call me sceptical, but I don't
You
believe
think they planned the coronation to ruin Archie's birthday?
I'm not saying that.
Oh, for goodness sake.
Just on record, Piers is shouting. Just on record, here, man shouting.
Sorry, this is the stuff of total insanity. Of course they didn't plan the coronation of a British monarch to ruin a 4-year-old kid's birthday party in California.
I said I don't believe it's a coincidence.
I think it could have been a way out.
You think it's deliberate?
No, I'm not think so. Because it could have been a way out.
All right, time out. No one can hear everyone. Only I'm allowed to shout on this show. Esther, apparently they've done this deliberately, the coronation, to ruin Archie's birthday.
I do see that argument. There could be merit there, because if they say they're not coming because of Archie's birthday...
Don't tell me you've gone nuts as well.
No. Family politics, okay?
We need
Tessa.
What we've got is... to me, they're like teenagers, and teenagers often make really good points. They're at the front of pushing the envelope forward. They've made their case, sometimes inarticulate, sometimes clumsy, sometimes egregiously. OK, now they're in their bedroom, right, and we need them to come out the bedroom.
No, we don't.
Yes, we don't. They need to climb down, because Mummy and Daddy at the table want them.
Absolutely
not. Yes, so if you do the metaphor...
And by the way, here's the other point. It's not just about what the king wants, because it's his son. It's about what the king should do as the right thing for the country. Lineker has nothing to do with the news division. He's not even a BBC employee.
No.
Richard Dimbleby was.
He was, in fact, Panorama was current affairs. It wasn't news.
Well, news and current affairs.
Yes, but the
they go hand in hand.
The point is this. BBC Sport is not Speaker's Corner. We're not waiting for a programme called Rant of the Day or Polemic of the Day.
They literally, every Saturday night, a Match of the Day, rant and express strongly held opinions. It's literally the Speaker's Corner,
sport.
Match of the Day, on sport. Yes.
On sport.
So what's the difference?
The difference is that when you have the responsibility of that position, getting £1.35 million of the licence payers' money every year.
Actually cheap for what he does.
Well, maybe that...
I think so.
Cheap?
Well, only because in the marketplace, if Gary Lineker was available to anybody,
well, he
would earn a lot more money.
And
he actually earns more money pro rata for other companies than he does for the BBC.
Well, indeed, he works for them then, and I'm quite sure he would have no difficulty at all finding other employment.
We shouldn't
and
begrudge him the money.
He would have the pleasure of being a martyr, and I'm quite sure
he's one of the best sports
that.
presenters in the world. He shouldn't be begrudged for the money he earns.
Tim Davie is the fairly new Director General of the BBC, and he said very clearly at the outset that he wanted to instill and insist upon impartiality. Impartiality is the BBC's unique calling card.
So
that is what's running trust around the world. Just
I get it. So can a sports presenter and a face of sport like Gary Lineker express a political opinion?
Yes, if he wants to stand for Parliament or go to
But he can't
Speaker's
do
Corner.
it. He can't do it as a BBC presenter.
No, he cannot.
So when
because...
So here's my follow-up. When Gary Lineker launched this year's World Cup, last year's World Cup in Qatar...
Wrong too.
He did a 2-minute monologue attacking the human rights record of the host nation, Qatar. He was told to do that by BBC management. So BBC management decided then that Gary Lineker could be overtly political in his opinions on the BBC.
They were
on the BBC.
At their request.
Hang on, I'm coming to you. On the BBC, Michael Cox.
Yes, that's right. They were covering their backs because there'd been so much about it in the paper.
So how could they have the brass neck to turn round, having ordered him to do that and express a political opinion on their main show of the year, the World Cup launch show? How can they do that and then turn around and say you can't express political opinions?
That's a matter for BBC Sport. When you're watching a sports personality, you do not expect political opinions. Now, Lord Grade, Michael Grade, who was 80 yesterday, by the way, he was
a great man. Happy birthday.
When he was head of Channel 4, he said the BBC is there to keep the rest of us straight.
Yeah.
In other words, to set the standard. And that standard means impartiality on all the important matters. And it's a unique calling.
Lineker's not even impartial about football.
Well,
we just saw him in his underpants having made a bet on BBC about Leicester winning the Premier League. He's
That's
not impartial
what he's paid
at all.
to do, though. The bottom line is...
So come on, then. You're the politician.
Yes, look, the bottom line...
And by the way, you profess to be the great standard-bearer of free speech.
And I'm not denying him his right to his free speech.
But you want him fired?
Where it conflicts...
Do you want him fired?
Where it conflicts, Piers, is he's in breach of the BBC Code of Conduct.
He's not.
He is. He's absolutely...
He's not.
I've got it here.
No?
It's unusual for you not to know this.
I know the Code of Conduct.
He is in breach. He's not allowed, according to this... in any circumstances, whether in journalism or finance, anything you post on social media from a personal or a BBC account. He's in breach of that.
No.
He's in breach of the
that
editorial
applies
guidelines.
to news. No.
And this is
an
impartial state
That
broadcast.
applies to news and current affairs
No, it doesn't.
journalists.
It applies to
It's
everything.
not in his contract. I can tell you, I spoke to Gary this morning, it is not in his contract, which may explain why the BBC has been incapable so far of doing any disciplinary action.
He is one of the
He is a freelance contractor.
That's irrelevant.
There's nothing in his contract about his tweets.
He represents the BBC. Everybody knows him as one of the great faces of the BBC.
Yeah.
And yes, he can have free speech. You can't do that at the BBC.
Why not?
That's the difference.
Why can't you?
Because that's
what he's
it's a
employed for.
taxpayer state
Actually,
broadcaster
hang on.
who
To be
lives on
clear,
impartiality.
he's not in breach of his contract.
He is in breach
I'm
of
telling
the
you,
BBC
I'm telling you for
guidelines.
100% fact, he is not in breach of anything in his contract.
He's in breach of their code
nothing
of
in his
conduct,
contract,
and he represents the BBC.
Nothing in Gary's
24 hours
contract.
a day.
Piers,
Nothing in his contract says he's in breach.
There, and I think you are right there, because you wouldn't be saying it so definitely as you are. But it's a question of taste and context and good judgment. This was an outrageous thing to say. It was out of all
let me stop you there.
proportion.
We're going to have a debate later in the programme about the content of what he said. which I took exception with. I don't think there's any parallel between 1930s German rhetoric led by Adolf Hitler and the
That's
Nazis.
what happens when somebody doesn't know anything about politics. Expresses politics.
Although there have been some leading members of the Jewish community who have said similar things about this rhetoric involving the small boats. So he's not alone. And in fact, I think he was repeating something he'd read from a leading light of the Jewish community. So we'll come to that debate a little later. I want to bring in Matthew Said. So Matthew Said, let me ask you this. You have presented programmes and podcasts for the BBC, right? Yes? You plead guilty?
That's correct. But,
OK, so you are a BBC presenter, albeit you're a freelance like Lineker, right? Yes?
Yeah, but the
well, hang on. I'm doing a quick
checklist
checklist to establish your credentials. So you admit to being someone who has regularly produced and presented BBC programmes and podcasts. Yes?
Like many political journalists.
Now, hang on.
Matthew Paris
you don't get to ask.
David Aronovich.
I don't want you dissembling, Mr. Said. I want you to answer a simple question with a simple answer. You have presented and produced BBC programmes and podcasts. Yes.
I present a BBC podcast, and
right.
I'm proud of the podcast.
And you're a freelance.
But if I can
I'm going to ask you the question in a minute.
This
is a fact-checking exercise. And you're a freelance like Lineker. You're not a BBC employee.
That's correct.
Right. So how is it you're allowed to be spewing all sorts of political opinions all over Twitter? Zahawi is sacked, you said, on 29th of January this year, but the corruption goes wider and deeper. 20th of November 2022, it's been a period of hugely damaging, contradictory economic policy from a single party. Truss trashed Boris, Sunak trashed Truss, and Brexit keeps shape-shifting. The most damning thing, Tory backbenchers have cheered and waved papers through it. Now, these are, if you're a Tory reading this, you would say that you're an anti-conservative pundit using your Twitter feed to express strongly held opinions about government policies you don't agree with. And so my question, I agree it's been a laborious journey, what is the difference between you and Gary Lineker? Why do you feel he should be censored and if he does it again, be fired, which I think is your position, but you, Matthew Said, can continue presenting programmes for the BBC and podcasts and spew away about politics with no censorship or being fired? Or are you offering to fire yourself? Live on Piers Morgan Uncensored.
May I respond?
You may now respond.
Thank you. So I think the fundamental distinction, there are many political journalists who I think are rightly hired by the BBC to bring a trenchant opinion to the airwaves, and we are sold and packaged as people who have strong political opinions. Michael's distinction, I think, was the absolutely critical one. There are certain people who are the voices, the faces of the BBC. Lineker is much more than a sports journalist. We can see this to a certain extent by the fact that his comment on a political policy of the day has become a dominant story. And the thing to bear in mind is that part of his moral authority, his cachet, his cultural kudos, is because of the relationship with the BBC, the platform that he has to speak to millions of people, not just on Match of the Day. When England plays an international competition, he is the person who is speaking and editorialising for 20, sometimes more, million people. And I think people who are paying the licence fee are entitled to expect impartiality from people with that status.
OK.
I, sadly, am a minnow.
Yeah, but hang on, I think, if you don't mind me saying...
I think, Piers, if I may ask you a question...
You may.
Just to push you on your position.
Yeah.
I agreed with a very great deal of what you said about free speech. I think there's a great deal of hypocrisy from those who are criticising Lineker now, who would be celebrating him if he had praised government policy on asylum. But let me ask you this. Imagine England are playing Germany in the final of the World Cup, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and people are looking at Lineker's feed because he is a BBC freelancer, and half an hour before kick-off, he's not a news journalist, he's not a political journalist, but because of the association with the BBC, he chooses that moment to make a comparison between the government, Labour or Conservative, and the Nazi Party. Are you seriously telling me that the fact that he is a sports journalist enables him to say what he wishes via the BBC platform?
Well, my response would be my original question to you. I don't see any ethical distinction other than his fame, which I don't think he should be blamed for because that's because of his success and his legacy as one of the all-time great England strikers. I see no ethical difference between him and you. And by the way, I like your stuff, as you know. I've told you this before. I like your column, apart from when you're hammering me, right? And I like your tweets when you're not hammering me. So to be clear, I have no problem with what you do. I just see no distinction between a freelancer like Lineker and a freelancer like you, both presenting shows for the BBC, him with perhaps more success, which is why he gets more money and fame, which is not his fault. And as a result, you think there's a distinction because it saves you from having to be exposed to the same argument and therefore get censored and maybe fired, which seems very convenient. This is Chris Rock. So we're only a few days away from the Oscars. And it was a year ago that the slap that went around the world was seen, where Chris Rock was punched by Will Smith for apparently mocking Will Smith's wife, Jada. This is what Chris Rock said in his Netflix special this week about this.
That's right, you say the wrong thing, get scared. Gotta watch out. You know what people say? They always say, words hurt. That's what they say. Gotta watch what you say, because words hurt. You know, anybody that says words hurt has never been punched in the face.
OK, Sebastian, look, you're a comedian, highly successful, but you come from Egypt where, you know, a lot of censorship goes on, a lot of suppression goes on. Not unknown, I suspect, for comedians to get, you know, punished or even put in prison on occasion.
Well, I got my show cancelled a couple of times.
Right.
And
So
I had eventually to leave. So that's for me is cancelled.
But you fled to the West where you hoped there would be liberation and freedom for people like you. And you've come to a place where comedians are now getting punched and assaulted. Not just Chris Rock. I think Dave Chappelle it happened to on stage and others. Often for expressing, in Chappelle's case, you know, a view about, say, the transgender debate, which seemed to me completely reasonable. What does that say about comedy and where we are? And how does comedy come through this attempt to basically physically beat it into submission?
Well, first of all, people say, can comedy survive cancel culture? My question is, can cancel culture survive comedy? Because comedy will always be there.
Why don't you give this dossier, 270 pages of it, why don't you give it to the British Boxing Board of Control? Because they're ultimately the ones that can sanction or not sanction your right to fight in this country.
My dad tore up his British boxing licence on TV in the 80s. You know, the board ain't going to stop me from fighting. They can't stop me from fighting.
Well, they can stop you having a professional fight in this country.
In this country, and that's fine, so be it.
Is that fine?
They filed 7 misconduct charges against me. One of them was they wanted, because we wanted the fight to go ahead. The second one was because we didn't tell Eubank immediately. And on the Monday they said, we're upholding all charges. I thought you lot can do one. You think I'm going to sit here and take this?
But if you have what they've said is, well, show us the evidence.
But I couldn't care less.
You've got 270 pages of apparent evidence. Surely the smart thing to do, whatever your views of the Board of Control, they are the governing body. Surely you should just give them your evidence. Let them respond.
That's down to my legal team. You know.
But what would stop you? I don't understand what stops you.
My pride, the way they've dealt with this,
pride won't get you through this.
But the board, I don't have to be licensed by the board. That's my views on it.
You do the fight in Britain.
I don't plan on fighting in Britain anytime soon.
Just put it all on the internet.
I want to. I want to. Trust me.
What's stopping you?
The ongoing legal cases. That's the only reason.
You seem to look. This is your career, your livelihood. This is everything at stake here, isn't it?
No, I agree.
Everything's on the line.
I agree, and this is what I keep trying to tell my lawyers, but you can't do this, you can't do that. Mate, this would have been public. I've known what I've known since December, and I've kept quiet, everyone firing, everyone attacking me, and I've known what I've known since December. And I'm sitting here again going, well, why can't we just release the information? Why can't the public just know what's actually gone on?
Because the public, you know, from what I looked at it today in social media, is savage. They've convicted you. They think you're guilty.
And I'm going to have to deal with that, I think. I think public have made up their mind.
How are you going to deal with that?
There will be...
Because Eddie Hearn, your promoter, says, look, it's time you've got to move on, you've got to progress. What do you think when he says that?
Well, I don't think I think the public have made up their mind already. Irrelevant of what's presented, irrelevant of what the board say. I've got strong DNA and I'm one hell of a fighter, naturally. I work hard, I've made loads of sacrifices and I'm willing to do what other people aren't willing to do. And that's why I'm where I am, not because of cheating.
If you feel this passionately about it, I can sense it. I can sense you're emotional about this. To be branded a cheat in the court of public opinion. What has that done to you?
It's hurt me. Yeah, it's been it's hurt me. This has. Yeah.
How badly?
I didn't think I was going to make it through this period. I didn't think I was going to make it through. You know, there was shame for something I hadn't even done. You know, it's hard because it was like I felt like I was on death row for something I hadn't even done. You know, if I had done something wrong, you know, I'm human. You know, I raised my hands to it. I made a mistake. Whatever it is, my personal life, whatever it is, I raised my hands. Never this. And, you know, I felt like 7 years of hard work and sacrifice and leaving my family and the image I maintained was just, you know, ruined at somebody else's incompetence. You know, it was, it's been hard for the family.
When you say you didn't think you'd make it, what do you mean?
I didn't think I would, I was taking it day by day. I didn't think I'd see another day.
You were feeling suicidal?
Yeah, I'd say so, yeah. Yeah, and it upsets me now because I don't know how I got so bad. I got in a really bad way, babe. You got to remember, if you think I'm innocent or if you don't think I'm innocent, I am innocent.
Yeah, I mean, look, let me be clear. I don't know, right? This is the first time we've met. I know your father from old. I've watched you from afar. I've admired your work in a boxing ring. But I don't know if you're innocent.
I would never do this to my family. I would never do this to my supporters. You think I'd do this to my dad? You think I'd do this to my son, who's now got to grow up and look at this? You think it's not who I am.